Video editing can feel really tough, especially if you're first starting out, and for a lot of new YouTubers out there, it kind of stops them from creating in the first place. Well, today I'm joined by Craig, one of the creators here at Think Media, and between the two of us, we've edited hundreds, if not thousands of YouTube videos. So first, I want to talk about different editing tips that will help you create better, faster, and with a lot less stress. So Craig, what is your first tip?
Absolutely, we're excited to dive into it. The first one that I have on our list is, and I think it's actually the most important, which is why I put it number one, which is organizing your project files. So this is everything, including your footage, your additional assets like graphics, animations, all those things. Organization is really important. It's going to save you a lot of time when it comes to editing your videos and expediting the beginning to a completion process. It just makes it a whole lot faster. And so what I often do is I kind of equate this to, you ever seen those Russian nesting dolls that kind of like nest inside of each other?
Yes,
And there's like the big one and the small one. So it's kind of like that. So you start from a broad picture. And so in your editing software, you might have like your 2024 projects or your 2025 projects. And then within that, maybe it's like your seasonal, maybe it's like winter projects or monthly projects. And then it just kind of gets more specific as you go down into these folders. So the way I do it is like Think Media folder, and then it's like January projects folder, and then the specific video title. So maybe it's like best camera settings. And then within that folder is like the A roll and the B roll and project files. So it's kind of this Russian nesting dolls. From the moment you even have the idea to make a video, could be a good idea just to make a project file name for it, like a little folder name of like best iPhone settings or whatever. And then begin to build out your A roll, your B roll, keep it organized. It'll save you a ton of headaches later.
The first tip I have on my list is to use engaging visuals and kind of the idea of show and not tell. When we're just simply talking about something, you're really neglecting the visual aspect of it. Can you use visuals to help reinforce a point? As a viewer, you want to be able to understand those topics in a clear, efficient way. So thinking about that, if you're not in the educational space, how can you show, not tell? You may be talking in a studio, but is it better off vlogging to show your environment? So that was huge for me, making sure that the audience not only hears your explanation, but they get to see it as well.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I love it. My second tip here is to edit your entire A-roll sequence, which is your main video file. So maybe your like talking head style YouTube video. Edit all of your A-roll before you try to dive in and start adding graphics or really anything else. You should be not focusing on music or sound effects or B-roll until you have your A-roll situated on your timeline. So you know even at least how long your video is going to be. For every single video I do, I always edit my A-roll first before I dive into adding B-roll and graphics.
It's kind of the idea of editing in layers. If you're just getting your A-roll right, then you can then move up to the B-roll versus just trying to start putting all the pretty stuff on without having that strong base foundation.
Exactly. That's such a good analogy.
Yeah.
It's like almost like building a house. Like you need the strong foundation before you
Right.
can add the beautiful paint and exterior features, right? You got to get that base and that foundation. Your A-roll is your story, right? So we got to get the story dialed in before we can add all the flashy pieces.
What I love about that too, you're saying edit your A-roll, and that's often the most tedious part of the video and often like not creatively fulfilling at all. But recently I found this tool called gling.ai, and the magic of this, it kind of just edits your A-roll for you. So if you're talking in front of the camera and you make a mistake and repeat yourself, you're going to have to later go in and manually edit those things out. But with Gling, it will automatically cut out all those different mistakes, remove silences. So it kind of gives you the A-roll just by clicking a button and, after 10 minutes after it loads, transcribes, and does the work, I can sit back, grab a cup of coffee and whatever, and then I have my A-roll done.
Yeah, super cool software for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what the best part is not only do you export it as a video, but you can export an XML file.
Yes.
So that goes into Resolve or Premiere or whatever program you're editing with, and you can later adjust all the clips. So even though I get that base foundation with Gling, still there might be things I want to trim up or reposition. So that is one of my favorite tools and saved a bunch of time. It saved me hundreds of hours of editing as my full-time job. You can get started for free by clicking the link in the description down below. So if you are looking to speed up your editing workflow, definitely check out Gling.
Awesome.
All right, so we're gonna move on to my next tip, which kind of Gling was a tip, but also second fundamentally is don't neglect audio. So this is very broad scope. We can talk about just having a good microphone like we have here, a good podcast microphone, nice and close. This is fundamentally, your viewers are going to be way more engaged with your video if they hear it right. I think audio is more important than video. One of my favorite directors, George Lucas, said that audio, the sound experience is 50% of the visual experience of seeing a movie. But when we're talking about editing, you can actually improve the audio quality with editing using EQ. There's several tutorials on learning EQ if you want to further improve the sound quality, but then using things like music or using sound effects in your videos. There's a whole layer of your video of sound design that you can use to make people feel. When we're just talking, we may not be able to trigger those emotions, but adding in music, adding that tone.
Yeah, it sets a tone to this piece for sure.
Absolutely. It just, you convey much more by doing so. And then I also say, like, when it comes to music, a lot of mistakes I see is people have it way too loud. Sound effects that are way too loud.
I'm guilty of this often. I'm like, dude, I just found a banger song. I want people to hear this song.
Crank
but
it up.
It can get distracting in the edit if it's definitely too loud. That's feedback you often give me. I send you an edit and you're like, Craig, listen, just tone down the music a little bit. I'm like, okay, Nate,
I'm definitely very conservative when it comes to that, because I want, if we're teaching education, you don't want the music to compete with your message.
Exactly.
You want it to add to it. But sometimes, in this video, probably don't have music underneath because we're just engaged with the content. So it's important to know when to use it, when not to use it. But if you're looking for, okay, where should I set this music volume? Well, I would say probably around -30 dB in your editing software is typically where I like to live. Maybe it's a little lower depending on the track, but that adds a nice ambience without competing with your voice. And then for sound effects, I think somewhere around -18 or very subtle, where you can hear it, but it's not suddenly coming over your voice and messing up with your delivery of your content.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a super good tip, Nate. So my third tip is to break your video into sections. And for me, this is kind of the idea of celebrating small wins. So if you break up, I literally actually color code my timelines based on the different sections of a video. So if I was doing like a camera guide, like best Sony cameras for beginners, and each camera that I'm talking about, the A roll of that section, if it's a ZV-E10, would be color coded yellow. And then the next camera would be color coded purple. And then I can visually see on my timeline all of the different sections of the videos. And then as I'm editing, I often edit out of order too, depending on, just as I'm looking at my footage, however I shot things, I might start with camera number 7 instead of camera 1. So I can kind of focus on a section by section basis, edit that section, and then celebrate that small win of, okay, that section's done. Because if you start editing in order and it's like you have a 30-minute video, it's kind of exhausting and overwhelming just to start at frame 1 and edit all the way through. So I often celebrate the small wins of hitting a section complete, complete over here. It makes me celebrate the small things in life, which I think is important.
Well, that's awesome, because I also do that color coding thing when I'm editing, because like if it's a certain tip, like a tip number or a chapter, I like highlight it and I have a keyboard shortcut, which is actually my next tip, but you can set that as a, I just press a number key and it'll color code those sections.
Yeah.
And then if you zoom out, where you are in the video.
Exactly.
And that does save time instead of trying to figure out where you need to be. You can see it as so that's a wonderful
organization.
tip.
A lot of these tips are around organization and just eliminating a lot of the decision fatigue that comes with editing. Even the nature of, like, as you're saying, zooming in and zooming out. If everything is all the same color, you don't have a visual representation of what part of the edit you were actually working on. But if it's kind of color coded, I was just working on the purple section, and you can reduce that stress of like trying to figure out where in the video you were actually editing. Yeah.
I love that too. And even for interviews, like you can color code like your clip of you talking, you're at camera, and I can color code mine so I know which layer I'm working on. So,
or audio files, like if it's my microphone, different color than your microphone.
You can color code the music differently than your normal audio. So wonderful,
really
wonderful.
Cool.
So keyboard shortcuts. This is a tool if you really want to speed up your editing workflow, is learning this, and it's really valuable. Anyways, keyboard shortcuts is simply like choosing a tool or a command. You can program that to your buttons. So a simple one of that is like Command B, cutting. So you can set that, might be different in your editor. I'd highly look up tutorials on keyboard shortcuts and how it works with your program, but you can really customize it. Like for me, for editing, like the W is actually cut, and then the Q button actually trims everything up to that point, and then E trims all the end to that point.
Cool. So you customize it based on your own preferences.
Yeah, and so I know right here, my fingers rest there, and I can quickly and easily just cut things. Those little things is what really does speed up your workflow. If you're doing this, you need all the time you can save for those things. Keyboard shortcuts, you can go really in depth. Another quick and easy one to do is double pressing the L key to speed back, play your footage back in 2x speed.
Yeah.
When I'm previewing a video, instead of watching it in real time, I can just double click that and preview it in 2x speed. And usually I can tell if there's a mistake, I can fix something.
Yep.
But it's great for quick playback if you need to review something.
Efficiency, just keeping things moving. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I always am playing stuff back in 2x speed when I'm editing, for sure.
It's kind of one of those things that you learn over time and how you want to implement it. What are some of your favorite keyboard shortcuts?
Well, the thing I was going to say is you often develop muscle memory around those. And it's like, as I'm even sitting here thinking about my favorite keyboard shortcuts, I often don't even realize which buttons I'm pressing because it's just like second nature to me. It's almost like playing a video game on the controller. Like you don't even really think about the buttons. You just So over time, I mean, for me, it's like obviously all the main ones like the blade tool, cutting up clips. So anything that can save me time and be able to get the video done sooner means I can publish it sooner.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I often find myself using with keyboard shortcuts.
I love that. What is your next tip?
So our next tip here is you want to spend the most amount of time when you're editing on your hook. So even if you didn't shoot a dedicated hook, you still have the first 10 to 30 seconds of your video. That's the beginning of your video. And this would absolutely be the most essential place to spend most of your editing energy would be this first 30 seconds or so, or at least in the first like minute even, maybe 2 minutes would be really important because usually if somebody's going to watch a video, if they're already watching the first minute, 2 minutes, they're likely going to be committed to to watch the longer duration of that video. But really just hooking your audience with that first 10 to 20 seconds, I think is really important. So often for me, I spend the most amount of time in my editing suite working on that hook to get a viewer captured and excited for the rest of the video.
And just as a practical editing thing, it's like you don't have to necessarily go 100% for your whole video if you are facing deadlines.
Yep, exactly.
So I love that tip.
Yep.
The next tip on our list is kind of to know your audience, know your niche in what you're editing, because there are certain like rules in each niche, or like if you're doing a vlog or if you're doing educational content. For example, for this video, if I have hardcore rap underneath an educational video, that's probably not going to sit well because, it's competing with what the style is. So you can quickly and easily like look up examples in your niche and kind of get a sense of what works and what's not working. For example, if people are coming to your channel for quick tips, you wouldn't necessarily want to bog them down with like deep storytelling. You want to get to the point. So you might want to opt for something a little bit more fast paced. But then if you're more slow, more storytelling, maybe getting more cinematic, maybe adding more B-roll, taking the time to color grade and get a vibe for your video, it's all predicated on knowing your audience. It can be kind of confusing to know your audience. What does that mean? Maybe I don't know my audience. Well, take some of your interests, for example, what your videos you're watching and you're consuming, kind of implement those things into your video, and you kind of get a sense of what things work for your kind of individual unique niche, and then you can further experiment. But I think it's really important to match the visuals, the pacing of your video. It's really important to just have the viewer in mind in your videos.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I think for me, I think about a video, like especially what we do here at Think Media, it's going to solve a viewer's problem. And so to try to put yourself in the mind of a viewer, if a viewer is going to click on this video, what is the problem that I am solving for them? Maybe they're making, they're trying to make progress in their life towards a certain goal. Maybe it's editing. Maybe it's buying their first camera. Whatever the video is, whatever the niche you're in, put yourself in the mind frame of a viewer and try to answer specific questions that guide a learner or a student or a viewer to the goal that they're trying to achieve. So my next tip is to take a break. Just give yourself some time, give yourself some space. And this is actually a really important one for me. I often, during my editing days here at Think Media, I try to actually time it so that by the end of a certain editing day, maybe it's a Thursday, I am only about 95% complete with an edit. And then I will pause the project, put it away, sleep on it, come back the next day to finish that 5%, but also review the entirety of the video. Because when you view it with fresh eyes, sometimes you're just so tied to a project. You're like emotionally tied. You invested all this time in it. You shot all this amazing stuff. Your B-roll took forever. Your A-roll took a long time. You kind of like you're attached to it. You don't want to cut stuff, but when you view it with new eyes the next days, it can often, identify blind spots in a video that maybe you weren't seeing the first time. So I'm a huge believer, taking a break, come back to it, see how it looks. And usually, I'd say actually probably 100% of the time, I view a project the next day, there's things that I would do differently.
Absolutely. Well, one way I found to like speed up that process when I started working for a team is like simply get fresh eyes from someone
Yeah.
else, and they are able to point out, oh, obviously now I see it. But dude, something really weird too is like if you have another person viewing your video, you become more critical of your own
You
video.
do.
You see it in a new way,
You do.
right? And that always surprised me because I'll like have my brother watch a video and he doesn't have to say a thing, but then I'm like 50 notes I gotta
Yeah.
fix on this thing.
Just like you watch their reaction watching it, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, they didn't react the way that I
Yeah.
wanted to. Yeah, I get that all the
Yeah.
time too. Yeah.
So
I show my
definitely
wife
if you
I show my wife stuff all the time.
yeah.
I'm just like watching her reactions and she's like, it was good. I'm
Mm.
like, it was terrible. I need to redo everything. Yeah.
I love that.
Uh,
So even if you get your friend just to watch it, I think definitely helps. And
yeah.
like you're saying, sometimes you just need that rest and coming back to it. But also if you have like a friend and they can just watch it,
Yeah.
it helps with that.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. What's your next tip
All right,
for
my
us?
next tip is pacing. Viewers today kind of have shorter attention spans. So if you keep the pacing like snappy and cutting out unnecessary fluff, I would say keep each segment kind of brief. So what we often do here at Think Media is like if we have 10 tips in a video, right? You kind of want each tip to be somewhat similar length. If
That's
tip
good.
number 7 is 5 minutes long and the rest of the tips are a minute long, it's gonna start to feel weird. But each tip, if it was like roughly a minute, it's gonna have a natural flow to it.
Yeah, that's really good.
Another way you can improve with pacing is like your music choice. Again, going back to like 10 different tips for a video, a lot of people will just place music and they might have one or two tracks, and they just place it on the video. But if you put like 10 different tracks for each point, it kind of feels like a new chapter.
Yeah.
It's a refresh, more engagement by having things change. So that's another way to kind of keep the pacing. My sub tip for pacing is kind of by cutting out filler words, which is like like. So if you are like vlogging or doing talking head videos and you often have those, by simply cutting out those filler words, you start sounding a lot more professional and more
Yeah.
clear. And again, Gling is another tool that actually automatically cuts those filler words for you. So as you're transcribing, it automatically removes some of those things. So again, another reason why Gling is so powerful.
I love that example. One of the things that I am thinking of though too, and something that you and I talk about is this idea of pacing, but there's also something of something being too fast and
Oh, yeah.
allowing there to be breath and having an intentional pace that's a little
Mhm.
bit slower, more casual, letting a viewer kind of sit with the edit for a little bit longer. So can you talk about your experience with that? Like maybe you could give an example of a piece that was like this sort of piece needed that breath
Mhm.
versus maybe a short, snappy list video didn't need that same breath. Do you have an example maybe?
Yeah, I think it's
Mm.
oftentimes like again, if you have a new tip or you're moving to a next point, if you can leave a little bit of a pause,
That's
like as
good.
a chapter marker, it doesn't even have to be that long, maybe like half a second.
Yeah.
It's just enough for the viewer to like reset. Okay, we're going to something new. Adding in natural sound effects. If you're vlogging out there, travel
Yeah.
vlogging, suddenly cutting to a scenic view with some natural ambient audio. Maybe you rise the music up before you're going to your next point. That's a great way to kind of reset the intention.
That's good.
It's all little things that you slowly learn. I think a lot of this you can learn just by watching movies or TV shows more intently.
Yes.
Some of your favorite, vloggers, just kind of take notice of what they do, where the pauses are, because if everything is one tone throughout,
Yeah.
it can feel very stagnant.
That's good.
So changing it up, that's what storytelling is
Yes.
that change.
Have
So
it be dynamic.
going quiet, going
Yeah.
a little louder, having music come in and go out.
Yep. I'd say your pacing, a reminder to our viewers, pacing does not mean necessarily fast. I'd say I encourage you just to have your pacing be an intentional decision.
Mhm.
Don't make it be something that happens by default, by you're just like editing and trying to cut out all the little mistakes and whatever. And then you don't really think about the way that clips are flowing together and music is intertwined into this. You're creating a story, really. And so you want that story to have a good pace. And that doesn't always mean slow or fast. It means
Yeah.
intentionality.
At like a very beginner level, I think it does mean to try to edit, be very brief and concise. But
Yes.
but once you evolve and you're trying to really incorporate more storytelling, then to use pacing to have that contrast, like
Yeah.
we were talking about before.
That's really good.
So what's your next tip here?
So my next tip is break down what editing is, just really simply. Just break it down. What is an edit? Well, you have your A-roll, which is your main story, right? So that's your talking head. This conversation would be our A-roll. Then you have kind of, if we go in layers, like you've talked about, you have your A-roll. Your next layer up would be your B-roll. So this is supplemental footage to like reinforce whatever we're talking about. If we're talking about this microphone, let's show some footage of the
Yeah.
microphone. So that's your B-roll. And then you have, if you go down to layers, right? Below your A-roll, you have your sound, so your sound effects, you have your music, these different layers. And then at the very end, maybe at the top of your layers would be your visual effects. So graphics,
Different
addition.
text or yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you break it down, you know, you have these 5 categories of assets that you might find yourself having in a video. It makes things a little bit more manageable. When you just look at a blank canvas, it's like, I have to fill this with a bunch of stuff. It can get overwhelming. But then when you break it down simply and just know, I got to get these 5 kinds of assets for my video, it can make it feel a little bit less overwhelming when it comes time to make your video.
I love that.
Okay, so Nate, what is our last tip of the day for this video?
So this is a concept that I feel like very strong about is the term steal like an artist. So a lot of times, you know, we get into video and we feel like we have to have an original voice. Well, really there's nothing new under the sun. There's no sense of like originality. I think that more comes after you've experienced from different creators and you kind of blend them and make them your own.
Yeah, you create your own style.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I look for inspiration. MKBHD for product reviews. He's, you know, at top of his game. And what does he do? What do I like about it? I like that he kind of makes you feel like you are there with the product and you can feel it almost by the way he handles it. You know, he doesn't have crazy music all the time.
No.
The way he even just uses his voice. All these things I'm learning from that one. And, you know, the idea of copying someone, I think, is good if you're beginning. You know, you're
Yeah.
not trying to steal his style, but you're just trying to learn, right?
Yeah.
Back when Casey Neistat got started, everybody was copying Casey.
Yeah.
And, you know, for a while, like those people aren't still doing that. But I think a lot of people, they started to learn what that meant, how to tell a story. And while maybe it was annoying for that season, that
Yeah.
growing pain, I think it was fundamental in a lot of how creators and how YouTube now is like learning from that. So taking from multiple sources, you know, other YouTube channels, but also looking outside your niche.
This
you
is
know?
big. This is big. Hit on this.
Yeah, looking outside your niche, it can be just like, okay, you suddenly have an interest in like, you know, food or whatever.
Yes.
But
That's me.
then-
That's me.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love food channels.
Yeah.
And then they have all these cool things that they do that tech channels don't do. And I'm like, dude, look at, I feel so inspired now.
Yeah.
Watching documentary films or stuff that's like, or even like reading. Reading, I find inspiration
Right.
when I read books. There's lots of
Well,
ways you can get
that's what was
inspired.
my next point is like it's going even broader, different mediums.
Yes.
Movies, TV shows, paintings. Like I get so inspired by some of those things and how I want to incorporate that in your own voice.
It's really
So it's
good.
all about experimentation at the end of the day. You know, obviously you want to learn and you want to get better at your craft, but I think also just taking notes. Oh, that stood out to me. Well, why did it? How can I do it that in my own
Yeah.
way?
Sean often says, rather than copy and pasting someone's style, copy and taste. So add your own flavor, your own unique style, create your own unique selling proposition. It's kind
Right.
of a business term for, you know, what do you bring to the table that's different than your competitors?
Mhm.
You might see some tried and true formats out there that are working well. It's okay to actually use those same formats,
Yeah.
but just add your own unique style to it. I think that's a great tip, Nate, truly.
So those are 10 editing tips that's going to help you make better videos and make them faster. Let us know what were your key takeaways in the description down below. I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you want to dive into more editing tips, you can check out this video right here.